Okay, so a little bit about me first. I'm a lecturer in information retrieval. I work actually in search engines, so the science behind how search engines work, so kind of how Google works. I also work in conversational search and how we use knowledge about the world to improve search. Before I came to Glasgow last September, I worked at Google. I worked in the research and machine intelligence group. I worked in the knowledge discovery team. We basically looked at the web and tried to extract facts and do information abstraction from the web. Then we actually applied that to different domains. Right? So I worked at health. I worked in the symptom search product. So if you come to Google, say I have back pain, you actually get back curated information from doctors from the knowledge graph that you would then get that's hopefully more reliable than what you get on the web. Okay? The last project I worked on at Google was working on the Google Assistant, which is relevant for today. And also, as you can tell, Google encourages people to kind of follow what they like. So I'm wearing the Bruegler shirt, kind of the home brewing shirt from Google. So this is going to be an interactive session. So I'd like to encourage you to bring out your laptops if you haven't already done so. Go to the website, dialogflow.com. You should sign in. That should take a minute or two, so I want to make sure that you get set up for the interactive part. Okay, I think most people have their laptops out now. It's good. I'm going to keep going because we want to make sure that we stay on time. Okay, so I'm going to give you, first of all, I think my clicker is working again. So first I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction to virtual assistants and how virtual assistants work and how Google fits into that ecosystem and the history. And then the second part is actually from a workshop that we did at Grace Hopper that my colleagues at Google did. And we're going to build a little quote engine, a quote app, or bot. And then we'll continue that in the live workshop where you can extend that and have more fun with it and kind of build a richer app experience. So this is a little bit of history. This was almost 30 years ago from the movie from Star Trek. And you had Scotty from Star Trek who was trying to talk to the computer. So he held up the mouse and said, "Hello, computer." And he was really surprised when the computer didn't talk back. Right? He had to actually use the keyboard to actually interface with the computer. Now, about 30 years later, we're finally getting to the place where we're actually talking to our computers. So these computers are actually able to help us, just like the computer helped Kirk run the Starship. Hopefully, these computers are actually now helping us to run our everyday lives. So let's give a little bit of history. So speech recognition systems have been around for a long time. Dialogue systems have been around since the 1960s. One of the first ones was ELIZA. Have any of you heard of ELIZA? One or two of you, OK. ELIZA was a psychologist app that was built by a professor at MIT. And it was basically could just kind of chat back and forth with you as a early chatbot. Real systems kind of started in the early 90s with the advent of better speech recognition technology. Here we have Nuance SpeechWorks. I want to fly from Boston to New York next week. Quite simple. Also a very simple kind of menu-based dialogue system. If you call the phone, like AT&T, you could say one of these 5 different words to perform different actions. Okay. This continued to evolve. Microsoft created actually the first multimodal system. So you could actually talk to your computer and use your computer at the same time, perhaps while you were, say, working on a document or something to that effect. Fortunately, that's no longer around. But systems continue to get better. The natural language understanding got better. So here we have Nuance determination. Nuance is Emily. We want to move. We want to change our phone line from this house to another house. And from that, I can actually learn possibly the intent of what you are trying to do. Okay? Also, more recently, perhaps you've used voice search on Google Bing, or if you have a remote that you can talk to as well. Okay? And there's also Watson. We can now do advanced question answering systems. And there was the DARPA Kalo project. That was a project from SRI that was built to help kind of military and engineers in the field. And it formed the basis for a spin-out company that formed the basis for Siri that Apple acquired. So today we have virtual personal assistants. So let's look at those in a little bit more detail. So back in 2011, Apple came out with Siri. That was a spin-off of the Kalo project. Google released its first Google Assistant in 2012. It was an early version that we called Google Now. That was then rebranded and extended in 2016. Amazon released Amazon Alexa in 2014. So So there's been a real resurgence in the last 5 years of virtual assistants, okay? Also, there's an explosion of devices. So Google announced the Google Home, which we have here today with us, as well as the Apple HomePod, smart washing machine, and then Android Auto. Let's see if that works. Okay. The really interesting thing here is that these devices are ubiquitous. You're talking to one assistant wherever you go. It's always with you, no matter what you're trying to do, whether you're washing your clothes or you're in your car. Or you can interface with your car via speech, or you could talk to your washing machine. So when you build your dialogue flow apps, right, they work across lots of different platforms. So keep that in mind. And hundreds of new devices are coming out probably this year as well. So agents are the new apps, right? If you built an app for something, the new thing that you're going to be doing now is building a bot or an agent to do the same thing, right? Interface via speech. So in some ways, we hope this is the future. So let's give you a little bit of background about the types of systems that are out there, a little bit of history. There were two major categories of systems, right? The first one is chit chat. So here was a little app called Pocket Friend, chat with a virtual pet. Hello, hi, what are you doing? Just chilling on my bed. Let's go have some fun. Okay, cool. Okay, there's lots of these little apps out there, but you can't really do very much with them. They're just there to kind of talk to you and maybe make you feel better about yourself, or just to just to amuse yourself, maybe because you need to get out and talk to some actual people. The second class of agents that we have focus on getting things done in the world. These are task-oriented bots that focus on doing something. Right? So whether you might want to, say, book a flight, you might want to order pizza that we just had for lunch, or you want to make a call or manage your calendar system. And so here we have one here from Iron Man. Does anybody know the name of Iron Man? Iron Man's agent? Jarvis. OK, good. So the goal is to be a little bit more like Jarvis, where you're actually doing something to actively help you in the world. So hopefully that we would actually say, get you coffee. So actual virtual assistant that we have here. So this is an architecture, not of how Google system works. I'm not going to talk specifically about how the Google Assistant architecture is, but more generally an architecture for agent systems in general. Okay. So first, we start with speech. We talked about earlier, we're using machine learning to do automatic speech recognition. It's taking what you say, and it's turning it into text. So here we have, I said something. Are there any action movies to see this weekend? It turned it into the text that it can then process. The next step here is language understanding, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. We're trying to identify what the person is saying and what they're trying to do. And then the next step down here is, so the request from that might be something called a semantic frame, where it was an intent request movie. The genre output was action, and date was this weekend. Okay. Could also possibly resolve to this weekend to today, or maybe asked Sunday. Okay. The last part here is dialogue management. So that's about state of the world. What should the agent do? Okay. So we have our language understanding, we have our state of the world, and we have our controller, the dialogue manager, that's determining what the policy should be that the agent should take. What should the agent do as the next step? Additionally, the dialogue management is talking to different backend providers. Google calls this fulfillment, right? Fulfillment engines that kind of do things on your behalf. Okay. The last step, it's actually in that case, so we have, say, the output is request location of where you'd like to see the movie, in this case, for the policy. And then the step is to turn this using, say, templates or various things, which we'll see when we build them, is turn it into a text response. Where are you located? Which then gets sent back to the user via speech. Okay. So let's walk through a quick example of this. How do these systems work? Find a good eating place for Taiwanese food. So I'm from San Francisco originally, and so here are some examples of different dim sum restaurants that we have in San Francisco. So the question that we have is, how does the system do this? How does the system actually process this request and make it happen? So let's start with our little utterance that we have. The first step is language understanding. We're going to assume that we've already done speech recognition and already turned it into text that we've processed. The first step is define the domain for this. So what would a possible domain for this utterance be? Anybody have any ideas? I heard whispers. You have to speak up. Restaurants, maybe, right? So we have here different databases or back-end domains, so possibly a restaurant database. We might have a taxi database if we're talking to Uber or we're talking to Lyft, right? We have movies, if you like movies, or in the case of Google, possibly the Google Play Store as a full backend, right? And for what we have today, we're actually going to having a quotes database as our backend. The next step is intent. The goal is identify the intent. Essentially, that's saying, what is the user trying to do within this domain? So what is the user trying to do here? Well, in this case, we have predefined actions that we're going to take that you have to define what these intents are and what the actions are. In this case, the intent is find a restaurant. Right? We could have lots of different actions here. We could actually want to book a restaurant, right? Want to make an order, place an order for actual food. And they would have different properties that you'd have to fill in. So let's talk about how we do that. So the next step is, I know that's a restaurant. I know that it's a find a restaurant. So from that, I look up in my restaurant database. And I know that there's a table there that describes what the restaurants are. That's called a frame in a dialogue system. So here we have one that says restaurant, rating, and type. So we're then going to kind of parse this natural language and extract out the bits of information that are relevant to this database, right, using information extraction. So in this case, we have a rating, with like a rating of good rather than bad food, hopefully. And we're also going to, in this case, also label Taiwanese food as the type of cuisine that we would like, okay? And the result of this is that we can actually almost turn this into like a SQL, or a very structured query language that we might be able to run in our backend system. So let's talk a little bit more about Google's virtual agent. Okay. So let's see how this works with Google Home. Okay, Google, what's your name?
Did I forget to introduce myself? I'm your Google Assistant. Hi.
Okay, Google, what's your personality?
I like the sound of a go-getter. It's kind of what I do when I search.
Okay. Okay, Google, what's your personality?
I try to be a good listener.
Okay. So there's different randomization. There's different randomization there in personality responses. So the idea here is that the Google Assistant should have a personality that should be reflective of Google. In this case, Google's personality is a bit like a hipster librarian. It's meant to be kind of cool. It's meant to be somebody that you kind of trust and that you want to ask for information. He's very knowledgeable about the world. Okay. So let's see. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this works. There's an internal personality bot inside the Google Assistant called Gbot. And Gbot is written by a team of script writers from Pixar. Right? That's part of the reason the responses are so good. And they have a whole template-based system for ways of kind of giving the Google Assistant fun little quirks. So what makes a good Google Assistant or a Gbot response? What do you think would be a good principle based upon what you know about Google that would be a good personality trait for the assistant should have? Or imagine that you were one of the Pixar writers trying to write, say, what's your personality? What should that response be, or what should the characteristics of that response be? Anyone? Understanding, okay, so have some empathy, maybe show a little bit of emotion towards the user. Approachable, great. They don't want to be intimidating. You would like it to be able to be somebody you can just talk to. What else? What? Want it to be correct? Okay. Maybe not sarcastic, but actually showing some empathy. Any other personality characteristics? Funny. Okay, great. There's a little bit of humor there, definitely. Google's always been a little bit quirky. Patient. Great. Those are all basically good things. Fundamentally, what's coming down to is an emphasis on the user. Right? Google is always about the user, doing the best thing for the user, trying to help the user get things done. Right? So it's asking like three main questions. What does the user hope to get from the interaction with the agent? What's the user trying to do? The next one is, how can Google put a positive spin on the interaction? So instead of saying something negative, turn around and make it a positive, right, for the user. And the last thing is, how can you keep the conversation going? Right? You don't want to just basically say one thing and then stop. You want it to kind of continue to flow, hence dialogue flow, right? So let's look at one quick example. Google, okay, Google, are you afraid of the dark?
scared, but then I learned baby hedgehogs are nocturnal. They're too cute to be scary.
Okay. So it's kind of funny, it's a little bit weird, but it's also giving you a point to basically maybe go deeper. Maybe you might want to learn about hedgehogs, for example, in that case, right? So it's giving you little pieces of information. So in this case, we might want to actually learn about the planet or about stars. Okay? Okay, Google, what are you thinking?
I was just thinking about empathy. It can mean so much to just be there with someone, rather than trying to fix the problem.
Okay. So here's a couple examples just of what we just kind of went through. So you can see there's lots of different possibilities. There's different randomness, so that when you interact with Google in different ways, you get different possible responses back from it. Not always the same. We didn't, I guess. Okay, Google, do you ever sleep?
Sometimes I power down. That's kind of like a power nap.
So how does this actually work? So Google is not actually one bot. It's many different bots that are kind of grouped together. We were talking primarily about Gbot and the personality bot. There's lots of other things it can do as well. So, okay, Google, tell me a joke.
How do trees access the internet? They log in.
Yeah. Bad joke. Okay, Google, what's the capital of the UK?
London is the capital of the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Didn't like the bad joke. Okay. Hopefully it still works. Might have. It's gonna fall. Oh yeah, I'll put it here. There we go. Okay, Google? Nope, I think it's...
What? By the way, the mic is on mute. To unmute it, press the button on the back of Google Home. The mic's back on.
Okay, great. We'll do one last thing here. Okay, Google, tell me the news.
Here's the latest news.
No news, okay. News provider isn't set up there.
From NPR News Now. Today.
So there's some latency issues, right? Also, we have lots of different things.
From NPR News as well. The firing of Deputy FBI Director.
Thank you. Maybe use some less. We also use some more creative words when we tell Google to do things as well, looking at the logs. Okay, so with that, we've seen how Google kind of works with different possible backend bots. I worked on the Google kind of response ranking team, kind of trying to pick between what bots you should actually show to the user and which bot should respond. So here's a bit.ly link that you can go to with your laptop. Hopefully you've all been able to sign in with Dialogflow. Does everybody still have that? I'll give you just one more minute here to, but let me put that back up. Everybody get to the link? So there's a Google Doc there. That's that we're basically going to walk through together as a group. And then there's a second part of that, which will actually continue in the live workshop, kind of building a basic bot. So you can listen to me. We're going to go through it together. You can also go through it on your own and kind of jump ahead. So whatever you're most comfortable with. But the goal is that each of you, as kind of walking through as a group, will actually build a very basic bot that will basically have a little quote bot. Okay? So hopefully this works. Live demos are always dangerous. So we're going to go to Dialogflow. We're going to, I think I've already signed up, hopefully, or you've already signed up as well. So this is the main screen. Yours is probably looking a little bit different because hopefully you have a better resolution monitor than I do here for the purpose of the presentation. You should see here on the left-hand side a little bit of information. So the first step here is let's create a new agent. Is everybody here? So we're going to call our agent that we have here, quote master. You feel free to call your bot whatever else you happen to feel like, whatever quote master, quote master 1. Okay. We also have properties here about the time zone, the default time zone. We're in GMT time, so we'll keep that. That looks good. And we're going to use keep it English. We don't have Scots English, but then we're going to click working. It will probably actually take about 30 seconds or so to actually get this bot together, because it's putting a lot of the little back-end infrastructure together for your bot. So we'll kind of wait a minute here. Give it a moment. OK, so we now have our little basic bot here. Let's go back to our left-hand side. We can see our bot, quote master 1. And then let's go to settings. Everybody following along? So this is what we basically have a description of our agent. We can change the settings. We can deal with the languages, the machine learning possibly settings that we talked about here, like using a hybrid role-based system, ML systems. So there's lots of different versions. I'm going to encourage you to explore some of that on your own. You can also have control over thresholds for confidences that we'll use to do things like the intent classification. Okay. So let's say it's a quote bot for women in STEM quotes. And then we're going to click Save. Quote bot, I should have said. So that's done. OK. So now we're going to basically go over to our intents. We're going to remember the intents are the different actions that people take. So if we go here, by default, every bot has 2 default intents. You have a welcome intent, what people see when they start your app or bot, and also the fallback intent. What happens when none of your other intents match? What's going to happen as the default? Okay. So let's start with changing the welcome intent that we have here. So click on default welcome intent that we have. OK. So currently, we don't have anything here. So the first thing that we're going to actually do is add some training phrases. So what would people basically come if they start your agent? How would they actually do that? Well, they might say hi, right? They might say hello. What else might they say? Can I have a quote? We'll get to that that's actually the possibility, but that's probably maybe a different intent. Anything else? I think that's pretty good. Maybe hey there. Greetings. Yep. So over here on the right-hand side, which you can't see here, you can go try it now. So what if we just say hello? I haven't clicked save yet. So that's actually running the agent. And it kind of has a default fallback. Can you say that again? Right. So it didn't know what was happening. But if we click save here, Google is in real time just saved the intent. And now agent training is starting. So it's actually using machine learning there to actually retrain the intents and what the intents mean. And now, hopefully, we say hello. We get actually greetings. Right? And so it was actually now able to infer the intent there. So we clearly see that now it knows about the welcome intent, and it can trigger that intent based upon our training phrases. OK. Great. Let's go, but the response here isn't very good, right? It just said greetings. So let's change that to maybe be a little bit more informative. So down here, we have the different responses. In this case, the responses are very simple text responses. Let's just get rid of all of them. OK? And then we'll add back a text response for what we should say. So what we want here is, what should the response actually be like for this? Right? This is the default that when people come to your app or come to your bot. So it should be informative. It should tell what you're actually going to do and allow the user to discover what you can do. Right? So in this case, let's say, let's welcome them. Welcome to Quote Master. Quote Master gives us quotes about awesome women in STEM. And you can say, tell me a quote by Grace Hopper. kind of giving them a possible use case of what they can actually do with this bot. So we now have a possible response. Let's go back up here and save it. So now let's go back up here and say hello. We'll scroll over here to the right. And you can now see, kind of test it. Hopefully it's changed. You can now see, welcome to Quote Master. Quote Master gives you things about STEM. Tell me a quote about Grace Hopper, right? Well, tell me a quote. OK, well, we still don't have that yet. So sorry, could you say that again? So let's work on trying to fix that. So we're going to go back up here on the top right-hand corner, top left. We're going to click Add. So add a new intent. Give it an informative name for what that action should be. In this case, we're going to call it quote. We just now have a quote. Then we now actually have to define what the different properties are for that. So the first step here, then, is we're going to add some training phrases, just like we did for our welcome. So what are some of the possible training phrases that you might think of if, say, you would like the agent to tell you a quote? We just did one of them, right, which was tell me a quote. It's pretty obvious. What else? May you give me a quote from Women in STEM? Others? Quote, please. You can edit them here. What else? Tell me a quote. Quote, please. I'd like to hear a quote. Okay. Now we have our basic some training here. So now we actually have to teach our agent how to respond back to them. So here, very quickly respond. Let's add a simple text response like we did just before. We'll kind of change this. But Grace Hopper, who's a famous computer scientist, says, hi, my name is Grace. We have basic intent here working. Is everybody following along? Shake your head, yes, if you're following along. OK. So now we can save this. And again, the agent training started. It retrained the rule-based or machine learning-based model. And so now we have, say, tell me a quote. And we get back our response. Grace Hopper says, my name is Grace. Give me, let's see, what else would be interesting here. I want to maybe something we didn't train it with. Like I want to hear a quote. It's able to do that. Oh, it's able to figure that out as well. Right? So it used some machine learning there to basically figure out that this kind of utterance is similar to what we use to train it. Right? So it's automatically classifying that utterance into this intent. Right? So we don't actually have to give it lots and lots of examples. It can learn rules and patterns from relatively small numbers of examples in this case. But maybe let's try something crazy like fly me to Norway. So again, that responds back to just the default response. Right? It doesn't understand everything, and that's probably good. So the next thing we're actually going to do is make this a little bit actually do something. Right now we've had a very simple bot where we've hard-coded the intents, we've hard-coded the response. We'd actually like to hook it up to a backend that can do something useful. So let's change that. So here, let's go down to here to the fulfillment tab that we have here. So this is a webhook that allows your agent to basically interact with a third-party service. In this case, we actually have a kind of a Flask RESTful API set up on top of a Google App Engine. So it's a really simple, really easy, just a couple lines of code to set up a Flask RESTful API. So we're going to enable this. And the URL here, HTTPS, Grace, hopefully I spell it right, gracehopper. blogspot.com/quote search. And we're going to go make sure here, we actually have to enable this for all the different domains. Make sure that that is enabled as well. And then perhaps not great, the save button, instead of being up at the top right-hand side, is buried all the way down here at the bottom of the screen. So the UI design isn't perfect here. This is still very much a work in progress. OK. So that's saved. We now have a webhook that we can do things with it. So let's go back. Now go back to our quote intent. So navigate back to quote that we have here. And we actually want to do some actions. So in this case, in the Flask RESTful API, we actually defined a very specific action here. So we're going to add this. The action that it's going to send to the backend is get quote response. Okay. And currently, it's not sending any entities or any information. It's just sending the entire response all the way through from the front to the back. Okay, so we'll actually delete this. We're not going to have our default response anymore. Instead, if we scroll down further, we have this fulfillment tab. Remember, we talked about fulfillment basically being the way where you can call a service or connect to a backend that you're going to provide. So we're going to enable our fulfillment, and we're going to enable the webhook for this intent. So you can define this per intent. You define what webhooks you would like to set up. And then let's save this. OK. So let's go back here now. Let's try this again. Maybe tell me a quote. Here's a quote by Florence Nightingale: "How very little can be done in the spirit of fear." So this now actually sent a post request back to the backend, got back a response from the database, and then rendered it back out here. So maybe let's play this.
How very little. Here is a quote by Florence Nightingale: "How very little can be done under the spirit of fear."
So there's a very, very not great voice rendering, but it's just for testing, right? The actual, what you actually have on the assistant is going to be a different voice action that we have. So we now have an agent here where we can actually get quotes. Let's do something a little bit different that we actually have here and teach it about the world, or kind of teach it about people, right? So quotes are primarily from authors. They're primarily about entities. So let's go and let's add an entity here. So entities are things in the world, people, locations, et cetera, any kind of topic that we want. So let's create our first entity. So in this case, let's have it be author. And then we're going to basically enter what those entities are. So we have, say, Grace Hopper, we just talked about. We have Ada, say, like Ada Lovelace, who is a British computer scientist. Who else do we have here? Any other suggestions for famous women computer scientists? Hopefully we know more. There's a lot more of them. Katherine Johnson is another one that we have here. Okay. And you can also add, here you can add synonyms. So maybe Catherine is just known by, I don't know, cat. I'm not going to put that in. Or some kind of abbreviation, right? So if you had a different word that Google should recognize that person by, you would also add it there as a synonym. And here you can also see that Google has the ability to do automatic expansion. So Google has the power of Google search, right? So it automatically has knows a lot about the world. It has actually the Google Knowledge Graph. So maybe if it's able to detect that Grace Hopper is the person in Google's Knowledge Graph, it already might have a lot of information that it could use to automatically expand different name variations of Grace Hopper as well. But we're not going to do that today. OK, so now we have our authors that we have here. So let's now go back to our quote intent. Now let's add some training phrases. So let's say now maybe tell me a quote by Grace Hopper. Oh, look. What do we have here? It automatically recognized the author. So it automatically popped it up here and automatically segmented the span. So here I could actually, if it made a mistake, I could extend it back and forth and kind of edit it on the fly. I could also basically say something, quote, Catherine, let's see if it gets that. See, it didn't actually recognize Catherine here. So it's not perfect. In this case, I didn't capitalize it, maybe, for example. But I can actually click on it, and then it pops up here a list of the different entities that it knows about. Here are some that are predefined here that we have. Down here, we actually have a lot of other ones that Google has already defined for you. Different like weights, different information, locations that we have here, date times, US states, lots of different possible things that you could automatically add that are built in, that you're actually using Google's powerful natural language processing that powers Google search, and you have access to lots of that here in the Google Dialogflow system. So let's label that as Catherine. Okay. And maybe what other ways that we would like to possibly add in another entity here? Give me a quote by Ada. Well, actually, let's just say, let's give Catherine's full name. And then we're going to save it. The model is going to retrain on the fly. So we see here the agent training is started. Let's wait a second for it to finish. Tell me a quote by Grace Hopper. Here's a quote by Grace Hopper.
Here's a quote by Grace Hopper. I didn't know what a billion was. I don't think most of those men downtown know what a billion is either. And if you don't know what a billion is, how on earth do you know what a billion is?
Yeah. I don't know, that doesn't make sense completely, but that's okay. Let's try another one. What else should we try? Quote by who? Who would you like to see a quote from? I'm not sure she's in this database.
Catherine Hopper.
Let's say by Catherine. Let's see if it's able to figure that out.
No, not just Catherine, Catherine Hopper.
Yep. Okay. Probably the same thing. Yep. So it was able to recognize there that it didn't match the dictionary of entities correctly. And it says I have no matching quote. That was a back-end kind of default response that we defined in the back-end when the database didn't have a match. Okay. Let's maybe try something that we didn't explicitly train. Give me a quote by Ada Lovelace. And it actually found that, right?
Here's a quote by Ada Lovelace. That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show.
Okay. But notice here we didn't actually give it that training example. But then it was able to generalize those patterns to the entire set of all the author entities automatically for us. So we didn't actually have to define those. So that's a very powerful feature, right? It would be a lot of work to have to manually define all these different training examples with every possible set of entities. So, yes?
So when we created the fulfillment, we set a URL and some get quote response or whatever.
Yep.
But there we never specified a parameter of what author we want to get the quote from. So does it do this automatically when you have an entity?
That's a great question. I actually skipped over that. So let's back up here. And if we scroll down here, we actually look here, the action parameters. So we have the get quote response. When we first actually added the author, it automatically added the author as a parameter to the request. So we can actually say here, for example, it automatically find author. Yep, great. And we can actually do things. Oh, sorry. We can also do things like assign a default value, for example. We could also make it required. So if I check check that box, hopefully this works, then actually the user has to define an author, right? You have to say, give me a quote by this person. It's probably not what we want to do in this case, but it's something that I'd like to kind of show you how it works. So here we can actually say, give a prompt. So ask the user a question. Give me the author's name in a quote. Okay, so maybe let's try this again. We have to save. It's always important to save your work. Tell me a quote. And it actually responded here back, give me the author's name for the full quote. Let's see if We haven't set up the contexts. Oh, there's a quote by Grace Hopper. People are not well-behaved mathematical functions. Okay, so that automatically filled in that to that request and then made it out there. Okay. Good question. Other questions about this? The JSON code? Yep. So this is giving you the full JSON that you have here. It's showing you the actions that get quote response. It's showing you what the parameters are. In this case, we sent in the author string, Grace Hopper. It's giving you a lot of metadata about the different contexts in the webhook that's being used for the call. It's giving you information about the speech fulfillment, what should actually be rendered. In this case, the speech and the display text are the same, but they don't have to be. And basically, as you walk through the more advanced options that you have in the live workshop, you can actually have more structured responses. You could have knowledge cards. You could actually return Grace and Hopper and the quotes as structured attributes instead of just giving you text blobs. So it gives you a lot of power and flexibility that hopefully you can play with as part of the live workshop later on. Any other questions about this? It would. Right, so we just saw it recognize Ada Lovelace. Good question. Probably not. Yeah. You actually have to find an entity list. So that's actually one issue that you have to find possibly large entity lists. Ideally, it would be just to define a category and hook it up to an external knowledge base, but I haven't seen how to do that yet. So, good question. Other questions? So we're kind of wrapping up here. So this is the extent of what we can do as a group. You've now created a very simple bot, right, or a simple agent that could be live. So let's actually kind of test it out. See if we can't test it really quickly. So down here in the integrations, we have web demos. The awesome thing about the Google Assistant is that it doesn't just interface with, or Dialogflow is that it doesn't just interface with the Google Assistant. It will also integrate with Slack, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, Skype, lots of different things. So if you create your agent, it can work across lots of different platforms, not just the Google Assistant. So let's try here the quick web demo. Enable that. And you can basically try out the little quote master directly in the web browser and show off to your friends. So we can say, hi, there's quote master. Tell me a quote. Give me the author's name, Grace Hopper. And there's a quote from Grace Hopper. So we can interact with this back and forth, kind of interacting with backends, doing posts. And there you go. There's a very simple, your first app. Okay. So I'm going to turn this over quickly to Richard. He's going to say one or two words in the last minute or two that we have about the agent that he built. So Richard here is a master's student here. He worked with me on a project, a master's project, to build an app called VoteGoat. So you can say, I'll give you the mic.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. Excellent. So we do have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, sorry. We'll be real quick. Okay.
Yep.
Oops, sorry. Okay, so we were tasked with creating like a movie recommendation bot for the Google Assistant. So we used Dialogflow instead of like Actions SDK. There's other toolkits you can use. So I'll just quickly show you what we did. If I can use this and switch over. Oop. Not used to using Macs. Right, okay, cool. Right, so you can see we've got loads of individual intents, and each of these intents where we ask questions, like gives input, we're not just ending the, the bot there. You have to give like feed fallbacks. So like if say they articulate themselves incorrectly, they make mistakes or they stutter, whatever, you have to be like, oh, sorry, I didn't catch that, and you have to do that like 3 times and then kind of fail gracefully. You don't want them to be stuck in an infinite loop because that's infuriating, Seriously, so I'll just quickly show one, right, so just the GOAT. So what's GOAT mean? GOAT is greatest of all time, so the greatest of all time movies kind of thing, So we had to provide a lot of examples for the training. So show me the greatest horror comedy movies of all time. You know, there's loads of combinations. Many movies have like multiple genres. We had to provide lots of really strange examples, and even still, if you say the wrong thing, it can, you know, not properly pull it up, you know, and you know, it will go to one of the fallbacks, to which hopefully you will recover yourself in that. So. Yeah, so I'll just quickly show in the side menu the entities, right? So we had to, when we created like the genres, right? So genres, not everyone knows to specifically say the genre names. We had to provide, you know, the synonyms for all of them. So that you could say, I want a crime, dramatic, you know, political movie, and it will give back like 3 genres to which we'll look through all the movies that we've got and, you know, give examples. Likewise, for the fulfillment, yeah, we used, instead of using the in-browser code, we used what was it, Firebase web fulfillment. So that's just Node.js, almost you know, JavaScript. From where there we used a Hug REST API, so it's just a REST API, pretty simple, with Python for using extra tools and contacting MongoDB, where we stored all of our movie data, which we got from the Open Movie Database. It's quite difficult to get movie metadata in a legal manner and stuff, so you have to go through the hoops, and that's why we used OpenDB API. So I'll quickly show you VoteGoat. So a really small resolution. So yeah, so you basically say, hey, talk to VoteGoat. You can, you know, explicitly say, I want to talk to this bot, or you can implicitly say, you know, hey, Google, you know, you tell me a movie, or, you know, something like that, and we'll go to the movie. And so yeah, we'll basically say, hey, welcome, this is what you can do. It's a wee bit malformed because it doesn't have like the proper markdown inside the tool, you know, the training. But see, when you make any of the changes to Dialogflow, right, you hit save. If you go to this, you know, simulator, you have to hit like change version and test new draft. And when you want to push it to Google, you have to like publish it, and it'll take a few days for them to check it out. So any of the changes you make to Dialogflow won't be immediate into production. So I'll just quickly show you, like, so hit rank movies. So basically we ask you to rank movies just randomly.
I found the movie Pernikova VEZ. Released in the year 2002,
so it gives you some information trying to not to give away like the plot and stuff like that, and we ask you to like upvote, downvote. I'll just mute it. You get the idea. So we don't give away the movie plot and stuff, and you can ask for plot spoilers where we will tell you the plot. You can upvote, downvote, and it will just loop back into the ranking infinitely, you know, until you want to actually leave or whatever. And then you can say, okay, recommend me a movie now, please. And we'll give you like a carousel of each of the movie items. Oh, well, actually, we have to rank a few more movies, unfortunately, but we won't get to that. So in order to get you to rank more movies, provide like leaderboards and stuff like that. And ideally, why we went for like, you know, ranking upvote, downvote is because, you know, we have to rely on these external ranking repositories. And hopefully with this, if we have enough people, we can build our own and not have to rely on these locked down, you know, sources of ranking data. Yeah, very good.
Awesome. You can talk to Richard. Feel free to talk to Richard more. I think we're about out of time. Also, just going to wrap up with one last slide here. As there was VoteGoat. Also, if you want to continue doing this, there are some really interesting opportunities that you can pursue. That we have here. There's summer internships available. You can also work on possible projects, master's projects or fourth-year projects. We could also consider a PhD. There are several open PhD positions to do work in conversational search and conversational dialogue systems. And feel free to talk to me afterwards or send me an email. And I think that's about it. How are we doing on time? Do we have time for questions? Maybe one or two questions? Anything else? Yes.
For example, I know with Alexa and Amazon, when you create your own skill, how they're called in Alexa, you have to, when you want to engage with it, you have to say, Alexa, ask my skill, something, something. Is it also similar with Google Home and Google Assistant? Do you have to query the exact action? Or
so I can actually say, for the default invocation is explicit. You say, I'd like to talk to this agent. So you would say, I'd like to talk to VoteGoat. So let's see if it works. Okay, Google, talk to VoteGoat.
Okay, let's get Vote Goat.
Hey, welcome to Vote Goat.
There you go.
Vote Goat aims to crowdsource movie rating.
But then we also have, you could also maybe say Google would learn over time, possibly Google's really good at ranking, so it might learn that Vote Goat is about movies and movie recommendations. So if you implicitly ask Google, hey, recommend me a movie, it might actually say, would you like to talk to Vote Goat? And actually give you the choice to basically trigger those apps automatically. So those are called implicit triggers, and actually in the live workshop that you do later on, you can see how some of those kind of implicit triggerings can work as well. So there's different key phrases that you might kind of give Google clues to say, this is what my app is about, or my agent can do. Good question. Anything else?
Yes.
When you talk to Google with like built-in actions, often circles around a few possible answers, and basically about almost whatever you ask it. Does this mean that Google developers spend, they mean like thousands or however many actions there are? Are they like all hard-coded?
That's a good question. So Google does have a large internal team of people working across like first-party apps to actually make it a compelling experience. Right? So in terms of question answering, in terms of media, news, restaurants, for example, lots of those different domains. The internal system that Google uses is very different from what you have externally, and so they have more flexibility in how they can define those. But, yeah, good question. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Could you actually go to a, say, movie geek forum and take the conversations from the forum and feed them into TensorFlow and spit out like a ready basically agent with minimal effort? Can you actually do that?
So that's a very good question. So it's currently a hot topic in conversational search systems. It's basically learning using deep learning networks to actually train these systems. So in those cases, they're called end-to-end systems, where you're starting from an utterance, just the raw text, and the goal of the system is actually to produce what the actual full dialogue response should be. And a standard way of doing that, a common way, is sequence-to-sequence models. A lot of the similar models that are used for translation are actually can also be used to learn dialogues, kind of back and forth, translating from input response to output response. And for example, that's been done on movie scripts. So there's a large set of all of the movie scripts that you can actually learn from. So you can actually learn a movie-based kind of chatbot directly from that. The issue with those systems is that it's hard to learn grounding. Right? So we saw those different parameters. Actually, what does a movie mean, for example? Those systems probably don't learn those, or at least the current generation haven't yet. I think that's still an open area of research. Yeah. But you could definitely do that in various forms. Maybe one last question? Anybody else? Okay. Oh.
I had one. In terms of the voice of the Google Home, does the person speak each word of all the sentences, or does it depend on the sound? And they just reproduce this word based on the sound?
That's a very good question. So the question was, does someone have to speak every single word? The answer to that is no, right? There's kind of standard base you might say, speak a large novel or speak a large set. That would essentially make sure that you captured all the different types of inflection points and different types of pronunciation that the system would actually need. And then it would actually use a trained model to then generate and synthesize kind of new speech automatically for you. So I think that was alluded to earlier with some of the WaveNet. What was it called again? WaveNet, where it's actually learning some of those patterns and learning the speech automatically based on example data. Yeah, good question. So I think that's about it. Feel free to talk to me more about this afterwards. We'll kind of hand it off to the next speaker.